One of the hardest parts of trying to get together something to talk about is figuring out what in the world we talk about that people care about, that's relevant, that will reach you, that will help make a difference in our Christian lives. So I was looking at our Bible study this quarter, the least of these, ministering to those in need, and thought maybe it would be good for us to take a look at the concepts throughout the whole 13 weeks of this Bible study to give us a context for going into it. Because I feel like, to me, this is such an important part of the ministry that sometimes we overlook, because we tend to be focused on the Great Commission, where God told us that Jesus left a message for us to go and share the gospel, right? And so we think that's what we're supposed to do. But the Bible talks so much about ministering to those in need. And that is just as much a key part of the commission of what we're supposed to be doing as sharing the gospel. So what I would hope to do is touch on, and you'll see here a lot of references to certain weeks of the Bible study where we pull out quotes and all of this. So it's basically random thoughts throughout the lesson study that will help set the context for the next 13 weeks so we can get the most that we can from this study. One of the things that I think we tend to do, just people in general, is we think a little bit about people who are in need, people who are hungry, or people who are in need of clothing, and we think there are organizations that take care of that, and we're so grateful for that, because then that kind of relieves us of a personal responsibility for doing that ourselves. So as long as I'm giving money and offerings, and they're going into missions, and the missionaries are going in the field to help meet the needs of people across the world, then I'm covered. Do you ever find yourself guilty of thinking that way? That's one of the things that we have to be aware of. Mary shakes her head no, and I'm glad to see that. But I think a lot of us do tend to think that somebody else is doing that. So I just got to take care of my own life. And we got to see this as a personal calling, each of us, to become stewards of our fellow man. And we were told when Cain and Abel had their disagreement, and God asked Cain, "Where is your brother?" And what did he say? "Am I my brother's keeper?" What was the answer? Yes, you are your brother's keeper. Not just your blood brother, but everybody that's your brother. You are their keeper. We are responsible for each other. So we're going to try to focus on some of that today. Now, I may ask for help reading because I left my glasses at home. I tried on everybody's glasses in the back 2 rows, and I still couldn't see. I may call on you if you get some help with some of these slides. One of the introduction to our quarterly for this month, they usually give you some idea of context and a setting for why we're studying what we're studying. And I thought this was interesting. Yes, we talk about the Great Commission that we're given in Matthew 28, where it says to go forth and tell others what we know about Jesus being our substitution for paying the penalty for our sins, and we understand that. But do you know how many references there are in the Bible that talks about concern for the poor and the oppressed? Over 2,000. 2,000 times that book, our Bible, talks about our obligation, our responsibility for caring for the poor and the oppressed. Just the volume, the sheer volume of how many times that's mentioned tells us something about how important that is. And not only that, the life that Jesus led when he was here on earth, we have a pretty good description of it in the Gospels. And we know that Jesus was always doing what? Healing the sick, ministering to those who were hurting, healing the blind. He took care of the basic needs of people before he talked to them about the gospel. And so we're going to focus somewhat on that. So who are those that are in need? You tend to think of first the most obvious things. You may think of orphans, and you may think sometimes of older people who are by themselves. You may think the poor need help, the oppressed. But this quarter, there are so many words that were used to describe the people that we're supposed to look after. And I wanted to kind of highlight those just to broaden our thinking about who it is that we're supposed to be caring for. The poor, and some of these I defined for us, just so, because there were some words in there I wasn't sure about. Now, the poor, we know those are people that just don't have enough money to live at a standard considered comfortable or normal in society. And here's the thing about being poor. Being poor is different today than it was 30 years ago. You can have two people working in a home and still be poor and still not have enough money to feed your family and provide shelter. Poor is different today than it was when we were growing up. The gap between the wealthy and the poor is getting bigger all the time. There's not a lot of middle class, and people struggling, and there's people who have a lot. And there's not that many in the middle. So the poor it's getting bigger. And sometimes you look at it and think, how in the world am I supposed to help address the poor? There's more poor than there are people that have money. So how do we handle a problem that's that big? What does it mean to be oppressed? And the Bible uses that term many, many times where it talks about the oppressed. And the best example I can think of there is when the Israelites were taken to Egypt and they became slaves there. They were oppressed at that point as a people. They were pulled out of their homes, they were taken somewhere else, and they become slaves. And so that's oppression, where you have a hardship that's inflicted because somebody has authority. The government can oppress people, right? Or organizations can oppress, even individuals can. That's what oppression is, taking advantage of somebody who is vulnerable. Marginalized, and this is a word that I don't know if you've heard it, but you hear it a lot today. The millennials, so you guys like to use the term marginalized. And when I looked at the word, is that not disturbing? To treat a person as insignificant. What a horrible, horrible thing to do to somebody. We do that often with somebody who is not in the power structure. They're not affluent, they're not socially what you're comfortable with, so we treat them as insignificant. We don't care about their opinion. We don't want to hear what they think. That's what it means to marginalize somebody. It's a horrible thing. And when that term's used, we'll be talking about it this quarter. Vulnerable. People who are vulnerable need special care, support, or protection because of their age, sometimes a disability, or they're at risk of abuse or neglect for some reason. How many times do you read in the newspaper today parents who are actually being charged with neglect of their children? There are children all around this world, and in this country in particular, who are neglected by their parents. We have an obligation as Christians to look out for those children. It's an overwhelming problem. Suffering, the state of undergoing pain, distress, or hardship applies to all of these things we've talked about. Sickness, we tend to think about physical sickness. What about mental illness? Mental illness is rampant in this country. There is more diagnosed. Now, I don't know if there's more incidence of it or more diagnosis, but if you were to take a survey of how many people have been diagnosed as mentally ill, you would be shocked at the number. And that is illness, just like physical illness is. And so we have an obligation to help those who are mentally ill, as well as physically ill. There's a lot of terms here that are used. Exploited, that's to take advantage of somebody by you overwork them or you underpay them, and there's a lot of that goes on in this country. I'm not going to talk about, and I don't want to start anything political, about illegal immigrants, but illegal immigrants are often taken and put in places to work like dogs and paid nearly nothing. Yes, they think they're coming to a country for a better life, and very often what they receive is anything but. That is exploitation, and their country's full of it. The weak lack the power to perform physically demanding tasks. They don't have physical strength or energy. They don't have political or social power or influence. So that's very similar to the term that we used for marginalized. Helpless, you cannot defend yourself or act without help. Those those were just the terms that I picked up with a quick scan through our quarterly. And it's, if you think about that, it's not just that immediate thing that you think about of people who are sick or without clothing, and you think of being imprisoned and so on. That is a huge grouping of people that are in need of help. And we are obligated as Christians to care for them. Now, when I use the term obligated, it's not like we do it out of obligation, but because God has said to us, you are to care for your brother, then we are to do that. And we're going to talk about reasons why. I was thinking about today, last night, why is it that we tend to not spend as much time focused on people who are in need? And I'm thinking, you know, we work so hard to avoid being one of those. We work so hard that we're not one of the poor. We work so hard that we're not one of those who's exploited or any of those other things. And we're so consumed with that we don't have time to see people around us who do fit in those categories or who we may be putting there ourselves. So we have to get beyond looking after our own needs to seeing the needs of others. And when you do that, you begin to see how other people struggle. You begin to understand how truly blessed we are. And see, very often, and I think it was Katie yesterday, we were talking about her leg, and it's been traumatic. I mean, she's a very active, adventurous person, so she's pretty depressed about this. But we were talking about a football player who was in a car wreck this week, and I've already forgotten his name. Any of you who follow sports may have seen it. He's in a car wreck. He's only been signed professionally for a few years. They had to amputate his arm. End of his career. Right there is no one doing that, right? And Katie said that, she said, you know, I feel kind of bad now for whining about my ankle. That's a small example of what happens when you look around you and you see that people are suffering, and you realize what I'm living through is not really that bad. And I have so many blessings, and you begin to see that. And so that is one of the benefits for you personally. When you begin to work to help other people, you begin to see how blessed you really are. And you don't think so much about your own problems when you're thinking about others.
I heard somebody, I say it was, I heard somebody say that they felt like maybe that some of the people down here from the food pantry don't deserve it because they go all these different places and get all this stuff and have assistance. I don't want to judge anybody like that. We don't know what their lives are like. And from what time I've been down here, this must make my, I guess, third month. She's been doing a lot longer, third or fourth month. You can't judge people. I mean, they walk in, yeah, you think some of them maybe, but some of them is just pitiful. So we shouldn't be judging anybody, and it has opened my eyes to it.
It does, and we talked about that in class today, how it's so easy to get focused on the people who may be abusing the system, that you begin to think too much about that versus the ones you help. And there comes a point where you just have to accept some people are going to play you, and they're going to take advantage, and that's between them and God, not us for us to resolve. But yes, and then there's also Pam, I think it's important to notice that sometimes there are people who are like chronically poor. It's like we've had people at the food pantry for the whole, how many years have you been doing it, Annie? 4 years?
3, I believe.
A few people that have been there from the very beginning, and their lives never really changed. They're there all the time. But then I also noticed that they have a lot of people who come 1 month. Something happened, they lost their job, somebody got hurt, they come for that 1 month, and they may drive up in a very nice car, but they can't make their next payment and they don't have food. There's a man that I run across on Facebook. His name's Jerry Wells, and he's down in Rockwood, I believe. And he is an individual, he's not a pastor, he's an individual who has concern for people. And so people have began saying, hey Jerry, I need a mattress. Or hey Jerry, I don't have any gas, and I have a doctor's appointment, and so on. And so he takes their posts and he shares them, and people read back and they say, oh, okay, connect me with them and I'll go help them. And there's this tremendous network of people stepping in and helping each other. And there were people in there, and I was reading it, and it's like, Jerry, I haven't eaten in 2 days. I haven't eaten in 2 days. Can you imagine that? I mean, we think we have it rough sometimes. But I dare say none of us has ever gone more than a few hours without eating, certainly not 2 days. And the pain that they're in, the physical suffering, it's just unbelievable how much of it there is out there. Okay, so let's keep going. I'm going to get on a roll, and we probably won't get through all this today. This is from Lesson 8. Pam, would you mind reading that for me?
After seeing that Jesus lived a life concerned about others, particularly those who were hurting and lost, we should expect that Jesus would also have a lot to say about care for others. He did. Jesus' teaching is practical, focused on what it means to live as a follower of God. As such, we can see that Jesus urges us toward acts of justice, kindness, and mercy, like those that Jesus himself did while here on earth. If we follow his example, we will minister to others as he did.
And so that's how he spent his life, that's how he spent his days. Well, he's going around, walking around, and the examples that are given to us in the Bible talk about his healing and his feeding people and his caring for them and addressing their problems before he ever talked to them about anything about following God. He talks about setting out a different way of living for those who are citizens and agents of the kingdom of God. So if we're a part of the kingdom of God, we live differently. And we know that's an expectation, but what does it mean to be different? In this case, we're talking about different in that we are focused on the needs of other people, those around us. We see that, and we're not just focused on the care and feeding of ourselves. Right? And so that is a part of this Lesson 8 summary. He echoed and broadened the focus on caring for the poor and the oppressed, emphasizing that his followers will live as people of compassion and mercy while they wait for his return. I'll probably get this out of sequence, but there is a slide here that talks about how the prophets that wrote in the Old Testament would talk about caring for the oppressed and the needs of the people. And when they talk about it, when the prophets talked about it, they were very passionate. They get very angry. They were very emotional about what they saw and what needed to happen. But now you look at us as a people, and we are so conditioned to what we've seen, there's no passion there. We don't get excited about it anymore because we're almost seeing too much of it. It's like, what can we do about it? So we need to get back to that feeling and that passion and that concern when you see injustice that's being done or when you see somebody who is suffering. It's another thought that kind of, I hadn't thought about it before. That evil persists in many forms in the world, and we know that Satan uses many different methods to attack us and to distract us and to pull us away from the gospel. Have you ever really thought about this? Evil is often made most visible in poverty, violence, oppression, slavery, exploitation, selfishness, and greed. I guess I did not really piece together that Satan is behind those emotions and those motivators of people. That is him working through organizations, through people, to use those things to make people suffer. And when they suffer, very often, you can't talk to them about God. You can't reach them with the gospel when they're in this condition. So think about that. Who are we battling here? We're actually battling Satan, and he uses these tactics to minimize the impact of the gospel. When the Israelites had finally been freed, and they were in the desert, and they were trying to get to their home, and God began to work with them to establish a new way of living. He gave them lots of rules. Moses wrote all of the Mosaic laws and all to help them to learn to live, because they had been living only as servants and didn't have any freedom. So he tried to establish a way of living that cared for everybody, where everybody had enough in what they needed. And so that's a part of lesson 2, which we'll be talking about next week, where understanding that God's intent for the way we live is to be fair. Not that there be the extremely wealthy and extremely poor, that we are all cared for. And there's enough. There is enough to care for everybody. We've got to figure out how to do that. I talked about this just a minute ago about that was the prophets. So in Psalms and Proverbs, they are particularly tuned to the challenges of living faithfully amid life's common experiences and trials. And Psalms and Proverbs are very good for practical, here's how to live your life. Daily things that we all deal with. Both offer insight into God's vision for society and His special concern for the poor and the oppressed. The cry of the Psalms and the wisdom of the Proverbs are that God does notice and will intervene to protect those who are too often ignored or exploited. And if that's what God's about, that's what we should be about. That's from Summary for Lesson 4. These are just highlights. It's going to be an excellent Bible study this month, or this quarter. And okay, this is where I've already talked about it. And this is where taking advantage of the weak and the poor, and all the Old Testament prophets wrote so much about it. A lot of those 2,000 verses, that's where they are. Christians often talk about their search for God and their desire to have a closer working relationship with Him. And so many others throughout the Bible indicate that one way to join in God, to get closer to God, is to join in what He does. What does God want? What is His goal? We become a part of that. So if He's working to lift up the poor, the sick, the oppressed, we should be doing the same thing. That's what our lives should be about. Now there's a difference when you say what our lives should be about. Not just an occasional, I see a guy on the side of the road and give him $1 or $10 or whatever. We're saying you live your life with a purpose of upholding and bringing up and caring for people who are oppressed, who are suffering. Not just as an afterthought, but as the primary purpose of your life. Can you imagine that in your own lives? Very often, and I'll probably get to the summary slide, we'll go ahead and talk about it here. As Christians, very often, we are so concerned about our church and caring for ourselves. I come to church sometimes, it's like, I don't like the way the pastor's doing this, and so I'm not going to come anymore. Or I don't like the music that they're doing right now, and I don't like it, so I'm not going to come until after the song service is over. What does that mean? What are you doing when you do that? We're making it about us. Our worship service is about God. Our Christian life is about caring for other people. But we spend an awful lot of time caring for ourselves, even as Christians. Make the church what you want it, make the service what you want it, build the programs that we want to be proud of. Proud of? That's a problem. That is a problem. We get way too focused on ourselves, even as Christians. In a Christian setting, in the church setting, we get very focused on caring for ourselves. This isn't talking about complacency, which we've already talked about, which is it's very hard sometimes to shake ourselves out of that. How many times have you seen the commercials on TV with the little starving kids? They have like pictures of them, and they look like bones with a big... Can you remember the first few times you ever saw those? It was like, it'll make you cry. How do you react now when you see them? Sometimes I don't watch, and then if I do, it's like I have already toughened myself up to that. And sometimes when we toughen ourselves up, we shut ourselves off from caring for those very people. We have to guard against that. While it seems the Israelites had failed to ever fully live out the blueprint for a just and generous society, the early church community took seriously the institution that there should be no poor people among you. There should be no poor people among you. One of the practical expressions of their faith was sharing their material resources. And you remember what they did in Sapphira and Ananias? What they did, they were going out and they were selling their land. They would bring the money back to the church. They didn't need anything for themselves. themselves, they would bring the money back to care for the poor, for the widows, for the orphans. And so in his case, they decided, very much like us, I'm going to keep just a little bit for myself, right? So what we're saying here is that the church should be about that. It should be about caring for others, bringing our resources in, and we do that. We bring our tithes, we bring our offerings, and they go out to care for others, but we also have a personal obligation to do that. Okay, this community was not a utopian society by any stretch of the imagination. As the number of believers increased, tensions grew about the administration of these resources. This was all the money they were bringing back in to the church. How are we going to take care of it? Remember, they got into an argument. They weren't being fair in feeding the widows. So what did they do? They decided they were going to organize. That's always scary, isn't it? We're going to organize, and now here comes the beginning of the end. But they actually separated the spreading of the gospel, the teaching, from the administration of the money and the foods and all for those who were in need. And so that was kind of the beginning of separating and organizing around ministries. And so there's a lesson for that, I think, for us in that. There has to be separation. You can't do all of it. You can't expect you've got a preacher, well, it's up to him. He's the preacher, he's the leader, he's going to go lead this ministry, and this ministry, and this ministry. It doesn't work that way. We all have our special callings. We all have a place where we can make a difference, and it can't rest on just a single individual. And so that's the way the ministries are organized. And even like our food ministry, which we like to talk about a lot, became a vision and the part of an individual or two. And then finally it takes off. The Lord blesses it, and it becomes a strong ministry. Now that we sit back and say, well, we're done. Are we done?
No, you can't stop now.
You can't stop with that. It's not just the feeding, because I guess the hunger is a big piece of it. And you've got the fundamental Maslow's hierarchy of needs. For those of you who ever went to any school at all, you know Maslow, right? You got to have food, you got to have shelter first before anything else matters. And so, yes, we do need to feed them, but it goes beyond that, way beyond that.
Well, a lot of people that have never heard of their church have heard of it now. That's a witness.
It really is. And
We need probably things to hand out to them. You know, like Carolyn and Joe that do good things, handing out things. We probably need literature and stuff to hand out to them too.
yeah, we have, being affiliated with Second Harvest has its limitations, and they do not allow us to give them literature as a part of giving them food. You can be in the parking lot, do it separately, because it's government driven. And so they're not going to allow you to tie those two together. That doesn't stop you from saying, God bless, or can I pray for you, as an individual. And that's one of the things I've seen in the home delivery part of it, is I've had people talk to me about God. I don't bring it up first, they do. And that tells you what a door it opens. All right, let's see, where are we? Talked about this, the reorganizing of the ministries, and that's one of the things I wanted to stress. Yes, we are a very small church, and the food ministry seems to have consumed almost all of our folks. There's very few people in this room that's not there the week of food distribution. Almost everybody is giving themselves to that, but there are other needs, and we can't stop ourselves from saying maybe we have the Dorcas program, which is we've got to get up and running again. That's a need for clothing. There's also other programs that somebody out there may have a heart for, may have a vision for, and don't just sit there, don't just sit back there with it and not bring it out. You talk it up. There's a program at the Adventist church we saw in a mission story once, where a man had a concern that single mothers very often didn't have transportation. And they were talking about they couldn't work. Well, they didn't have a way to get to work. They didn't live where there was mass transportation, and they needed vehicles. So he had this vision of taking cars that were like good old Toyotas and things that last for like 20 years, patch them up and give them to somebody. They started that program, and now they have this huge program where they give vehicles to people who don't have a way to get to work. I'm telling you, we can do that kind of thing. we limit ourselves, God does not. So if you have a vision, it can become reality. The love of God is expressed in the plan of salvation and enacted in the life and the sacrifice of Jesus offers us forgiveness, life, and hope. And the people that we're talking about here today, that's one of the things they do not have much of, is hope for anything to ever be different. As recipients of this grace, we seek to share this with others, not to earn salvation. And that's what can happen very easily, is it can become very legalistic. And I feel like, okay, I'm in a good position now. I come to church every week and I work in the food ministry and I'm doing pretty good. You better look hard when you start to think like that. That is legalism, and it will never get you anywhere. And you all understand this. This desire to serve is the result of a changed heart, not the other way around. If it's not, then we've got a lot of praying we've got to do. The gospel transforms relationships and moves us to serve, particularly those in need. You have to look at your motivations. And sometimes you may start it in a legalistic way. You may think, oh, here's an opportunity, I can go serve. But then you get there and you change. Because sometimes you see God closer there than you do anywhere else. People can stand here and talk about Him all day, preach and read and so on, but when you see Him working in lives and changing and blessing that ministry in a way that I just cannot believe what we're doing back there. The amounts of food that are going out of this building are incredible. And that's God working. And so you come work in that ministry for a little while, you may not have had a lot of faith in God, but you'll leave with it. It transforms relationships and it moves us to serve. You begin to serve for a different reason.
Teresa, could I add one more thing here?
Sure.
The other day, I heard, and they said that in America, we throw away 40% of all our food.
Isn't that incredible? There are countries around the world who have overcome the legal problems. They don't do that anymore. You can go to a restaurant at the end of this business day and take that food to the homeless. The grocery stores have stopped throwing away food. They give it to the homeless. We can do that. This country can do that.
When Bobby worked in the cafeteria, they would let them bring food home at the end of the day.
For a while.
For a while. But then they stopped that. Well, down at the library now on Monday through Thursday, they have activities for kids. I take the kids down. And at first I asked, about they give free lunches. It's just like a summer reading program. And it's called Gus the Bus. And they bring a big bus down on Wednesdays and they feed all the kids. I felt funny about it because I thought, we have food at home. And they said, no, that's not it. But, I mean, it just...
There's enough, and that's what it said.
Well,
Joe,
I forgot what I was going to say, but the point about maybe I would bring it every minute. Bobby, couldn't make any food home for the longest. I don't think they still do. And I was talking to one of the girls that works in the cafeteria that brings the food down there. And I said, it's a shame. I said, it's great that you all do this, because this is the only food some kids have in the summer, is when they feed them at the schools. And I said, it's good you do it. She said, it's sad that the food that we can't
use
at the end of the school day for these kids.
And that's mostly a liability. People are afraid of lawsuits and so on, and so they would rather throw it away than to work through ways around that.
Yeah.
And I can almost guarantee you that the people who are on the streets hungry are not going to be the ones to sue you because they got a bad piece of bread.
Yeah.
Joe?
I heard a comment yesterday that the biggest component of what we throw out and put in the landfills is food.
It's criminal, isn't it? It is criminal.
Board and paper, food.
Well, yes. The Second Harvest has got a new program now where it's I can't remember the name of it, but the purpose of it is to begin to stop that practice. How can we use it? Grocery stores throw away incredible amounts of food. Because it's past its sell-by date doesn't mean it's by its use-by date, but still it's thrown away. There is enough, and God tells us that. There's enough for everybody. We just gotta figure out how to use it. And then,
One thing, one of the grocery chains that I really admire is Kroger's, because they do not throw it away. They give it, like, if you've ever been to the projects,
Yes.
Morgan, Scott County project, those cakes and bread and all are from Kroger's, where they couldn't use them, or they used by date and buy, and they give it to those in need.
and you know, Jeanette, that would not work if they didn't have volunteers out here who are taking that food and giving it to them. That's where we come in. And we can go work with a grocery store chain. We could go, you go, we could go to Food City, and we could begin to try to set that same relationship up. You know? But what does it consume you? It takes all of your time and energy, and we are there going, man, that's just a little too much. I don't want to give that much. You know, I'll give you this many hours, and that's it. We can't have any more. That's because our lives are not focused on service. It's only an ancillary piece of our lives. There's so much that we can do, and God will bless it beyond your beliefs. In seeking to fulfill the Christian mission, we should not underestimate the potential of the church as an organized community of believers. But by working with fellow believers in the community of faith, we can be a blessing to those around us. People like to argue against organized religion these days. Well, I hear it a lot from the millennials. Sorry guys, I mentioned you twice. You millennials or you Generation X? You're millennials, aren't you? I love millennials. I've got two of them. The thing is, they don't really like organized religion, and for some reason that I can say that I disagree with. There are some bad things about it, but we cannot do the same things that we're doing without that organization. We have a structure here in the body of people that we can pull from who commit to an idea, and then God blesses it and it takes off. Danny could have never got this program doing what it's doing by himself if he didn't have his church family around it. So that organized religion, yes, it has its problems, but it also has its advantages. When it talks about the mission of the Christian, we go back to this Matthew 28, 19 and 20. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, of the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you, and surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age. The Great Commission that all Christians understand to be their thing they're supposed to do. But how do we do that effectively? Okay, I'm going to get a couple more slides here. I've said some of this already, but I think it won't hurt to say it again. The temptation is that when we get together as a church, we become distracted with keeping the church itself going, forgetting that the church exists to serve the world in which God has placed it. As a church body, we must not ignore the suffering and the evil that exists around us. If Christ didn't ignore it, we must not either. We must be faithful to our mandate to preach the gospel, and along with that preaching comes the work of helping the oppressed, the hungry, the naked, the helpless. It sounds like I'm going blah, blah, blah. I don't know about you guys. You're probably tired of hearing me. But I want to tie this all together. We got to get serious about this. The people around us that are suffering, that are in need, is tremendous. And that even among our own church family, we have people who are struggling every day, and we don't even look at it. We don't look for it. Even our own brothers and sisters in our churches, very often we don't look at what their struggles are. We got to open our eyes to that. We've got to get serious about it, because that's the best way to spread the gospel. And I love this quote from the Ministry of Healing. As Ellen White famously wrote, Christ's method alone will give true success in reaching the people. The Savior mingled with men as one who desired their good. He showed his sympathy for them. He ministered to their needs. He won their confidence. Then he bade them to follow me. You can't talk to a person about God when their kids are hungry. Okay? You've got to take care of that. You've got to focus on those fundamental needs as a people. Then the gospel just falls into place. I've had people tell me when I go to their door with a box of groceries to say, this is the only church I know of that does this. Now that's not, there are churches that do it, but they were not aware of it. And until a few years ago, we weren't doing it. We were sitting here mostly focused on taking care of ourselves as a church and not on the ministry. And now that they're focused on the ministry, it's completely changed the nature of the church itself. And people see that. And they're drawn to it. I had a lady tell me, she said, I'm going to show up there one day. I'm telling you, I'm going to show up. And they had a military guy not long ago who had been injured. It's a terrible, sad case. And he wanted to know what time we started on Sunday. And I said, well, we start around 9:30, but it's on Saturday. And his head just kind of whipped around. And I said, yeah, you might find it a little unusual, but yeah, we keep the Sabbath. And we'd love for you to come. And that's what I always tell them. When they say I may show up there, I said, we would love for you to come, but we can't approach them with it because they're legal reasons. I think that's the end. So I guess here's the thing, folks. We've got a great opportunity here over these next 13 weeks to study this in depth, to take it to heart. We have to prepare ourselves for a message like this. It's like I can go through it and we can study it every week and I can close myself off and say, I am not willing to give any more time. I'm not willing to bring anybody to my home. I draw all these boundaries around what I can do or what I'm willing to do. And this message will not be as effective if we open our hearts to it. And over this time we prayerfully go through this study, I think it will change us in a way that we can truly become the effective instrument that God wants us to be. Okay, let's have our closing song.